Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Daily Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today, first-time return guest for the video series, Rob Pincus. He was on one of the very first Daily Bullets, and I wanted to ask him back because he's been really active in something that's been making a lot of news lately, and that's 3D printing. Rob, thanks for joining us again today, man.
Man, it's great to be back. I think it was right around Election Day or on Election Day when the last one aired. And today, of course, is the big runoff for the Senate in Georgia. So I guess at least on big political events, I'm here for you while everybody else is busy getting out the vote, I guess.
Sure. And if we have time, we may touch on the goings-on in Georgia. But what I really want to talk about, and this is kind of timeless because it's always, hopefully, always going to be pertinent, is the 3D printing. Big news got made middle of last month when Polymer 80 got a visit from the ATF, and there have been no, I want to be absolutely clear, there have been no charges filed. There's been no legal action whatsoever other than a visit from the ATF. There were rumors that one unnamed person that was a former customer got visited by the ATF. Those have never been substantiated, but
right.
they were out there. So let's talk about 3D printing. You went out, you got a 3D printer, and you've been working on producing some guns with plans.
Yep, guns and gun parts. So this is something that I've been really curious about, watched from afar, the whole 3D printing thing, the do-it-yourself, the build your own guns, 80% lowers, that kind of stuff for years, right? Going back into the 90s, the first assault weapons ban, looking at this kind of stuff. And of course, as everybody knows, for years, I've been working with my partners to bring a gun to market. I have a manufacturer's license, FFL, for Avidity Arms to bring a gun to market that's a true production gun. So this is something I've been around the periphery of for a long time. And even as Avidity Arms, we've paid companies that do 3D printing to do prototyping, R&D for us. We send them, the files. I send the designs to a guy who does the CAD. The guy who does the CAD sends them the files. They print the product and they send it to us to see if the parts all fit and it feels good in the hand and all that. So I've been involved in it, and I've paid people to do it. I've watched people do it, but I really wanted to do it myself. And it's interesting that it does come on the heels. Our conversation comes on the heels of everything that happened with Polymer 80. Because I became a big fan of those do-it-yourself kits late last year. I was actually Don Edwards of Green Line Tactical. I had one of these Polymer 80 kits for years. In fact, one of the original black boxes for 2 or 3 years ago that I had just sitting around in the office, and I kept meaning to do it, never got around to it. Don got one, I don't know, back in October, and he said, hey, Rob, let's do this. So we spent an afternoon down in Florida. For people who aren't familiar with what's in this box, it's a non-gun object. This thing that lives inside of this jig is not a gun. It's not regulated by the ATF in any way. It's just a piece of plastic that, like any other piece of plastic, can become a gun, right, if you do a whole bunch of stuff to it. This is a lot of the way there. Remember, 80% is sort of a misnomer. It's a colloquial term that we've allowed in the gun community to exist. Obviously, Polymer 80 uses it as part of their marketing. Lots of companies do. SS80, the 80% lowers. Lots of companies do. But there is no such thing as 80%. This is just that what happens is the ATF, a manufacturer goes to the ATF and says, we want to sell this non-gun object with this jig and some of these parts. Is that okay? Or will you consider this a gun? The ATF says, nope, we don't consider that a gun. Cool, non-gun object gets sold. And as individuals, we have the right to make and own our own firearms. Now,
right.
If you don't have the manufacturer's license, you can't make them for sale. Now, I'm right now out at my Western headquarters in Colorado, and I am acting as an individual. I'm not acting as Avidity Arms. I'm not acting under my manufacturer's license when I put one of these Polymer 80 kits together. So this is a slide. It's a regular Glock type slide. The internal parts are regular Glock type. This is an Apex trigger that fits into any kind of Glock 17 size gun. And this is a Polymer 80 frame that at one point was just like that one I just showed, the non-gun object. That I then drilled and milled and sanded and fit all the parts into. And now this is a clear, as you can see at home. This is now a functioning firearm, right? So this is something I made. There's no serial number on it. There's no markings on it. I personally do recommend, and this is relatively new build, but it hasn't been really out of my immediate control. But I do recommend putting a mark of some kind on the plate that's provided or somewhere else on a gun. Just like you would, if you had a TV, right? Like you didn't want stolen, you'd take a pen and you'd mark it, or you'd take a Dremel and you'd mark it. So you mark these things because they're of value. Now this is the first usable frame, essentially, of a firearm that I printed off of the 3D printer. I've been doing this for about 2.5 weeks, so I'm new at it. This is the first one that was usable. This is actually a model, a file that you can get offline or online. And obviously, I'm a big fan and supporter of Polymer 80, but that works off of the Polymer 80 style non-gun object. When you print it, it already has the holes for all the pieces, parts, and it already is milled out in the middle. And this will accept the rails and the other frame parts from Polymer 80 and or from Glock, so that you can put this together and build this as a firearm. I haven't put this all the way together. I'm actually taking it back to the Eastern HQ later this week, and I'm going to put this and a couple of other ones together and check them out. Now, here's what I like about 3D printing. First of all, I'm not saying this is a better way to get a firearm, right? Trust me, even though the printer I have is about a $200 printer, you can get printers for under $150 where you could print usable gun parts and frames. But you're not going to save money doing this. Frankly, you're not going to save money doing a Polymer 80 build. So you don't do it to save money. I'm obviously here on an international video broadcast. I'm using my name under Second Amendment Foundation. You're there. Everybody knows I have this firearm. The ATF's watching. I have this firearm. Whoever else. I'm not just saying this to have guns that are off the books. I have plenty of guns off the books. I have an FFL. I'm on the list. And the other thing that's important to remember is that for me, this is a hobby, right? I still love guns. I'm still a gun geek, right? So getting into a gun and actually making it work, whether back in the 90s I was filing, Ed Brown parts to fit into a Norinco 1911 frame that I bought at the gun shop and a slide I picked up at the gun show. Now, instead of filing metal, I'm sanding and filing and dremeling plastic. So even this one you can see has been modified. It's a very blocky file, and the Glocks are blocky enough anyway in my hand, so I filed this down, the contour. I'm learning CAD, because if you're going to do 3D printing and you want to do your own things and not just hit print on other people's files, just like you would learn to use Photoshop, or you would learn to use a word processor to write your own book, you have to learn how to use CAD. So I'm starting to learn how to contour the grips inside of CAD and do my own stuff. And now I've got a 3D printed frame that I don't have to sand. I've got one that actually is set up to fit my hand. As you can see, as a right-handed person, I've got a shelf here for the, if I can get the right kind of focus there, a shelf here for the thumb, and a different kind of contour for the trigger finger as I come down to where the trigger is going to be there. And then, of course, Avidity Arms. I got to get in and do some more R&D. Instead of paying other people to print stuff that I'm R&Ding, I get into my Avidity Arms stuff. Now, this was a disaster of a print, and I want to make sure it's really clear. Right? Yeah, this looks like, oh wow, that's easy. It can be easy, I get it, but and the Cindy Lou, young lady Pincus, and I, we did cookie cutters, we did Christmas tree ornaments, we've done all kinds of things on the printer. The first thing I did for her was a little doll. The very first thing I printed was for her. But some of this more complex stuff and some of the more stronger materials, it's a disaster. Some prints don't get past 15 minutes before you realize they're trash, and you abort the print and you start over, and then you might get 45 minutes into the next one. And sometimes you leave the HQ and it prints entirely, and then you find out it was trash anyway. So there's a lot of cool things going on with 3D printing, and it's not all nefarious, dark web, sinister stuff. It's a hobby like anything else for me right now, but it does have potential to make operational firearms and to help the R&D as I develop other products for holsters, for magazines, for accessories for guns, or even entire guns.
One thing I can think that for the average person would be a huge advantage for 3D printing is they can make a gun that exactly fits their specific hand. I've shot Glocks, ever since I started becoming serious about self-defense, and they're all very good, but I could do a few things here, or maybe one thing there that would make it fit even better. And 3D printing will allow that. I think that's a huge benefit.
It is. It's like crafting your own, wood grips for a revolver back in the day, or even for a 1911. some of the custom work that gets done with high-end trap guns, right, where the stock is fit to your length of pull and your cheek and your offset and your camber and the comb is adjustable. All these things that we do, well, now we can actually do them in a computer software, the CAD file, send it to the printer, and the printer, puts it out. So again, this one's set up for me. If you sent me the measurements of your hand or a picture of your hand, like I see at some point, I will be able to customize a grip contour for my daughter, my friends, maybe for customers. And again, this is where it gets really kind of sketchy in terms of the law. Not sketchy, but you have to be careful. I can't make this for you. I could go into CAD, close all these holes in, right? Fill this in with something that you're going to have to drill out or mill out. And theoretically, it's just a piece of plastic that I would give to you, but the outside shape would fit your hand really well should you decide to turn that non-gun object into a gun. Now, this is where it gets really gray. For me, especially with a manufacturer's license, I'm not likely to do that. Now, could there come a time when Avidity Arms gets into the custom contoured grip game? Sure, why not, right? I mean, if it gets easy enough that it sort of becomes a template and I have a way of capturing somebody's hand shape, size, finger length, thumb length, the diameter right here, the gap between the thumb and forefinger, if I get all those measurements and I create a gun that's custom fit to your hand, how is that any different than the guy who makes a custom wooden stock for the high-end skeet shooter?
Exactly right. What I love about 3D print, like you said, you're not going to. It's the old thing of reloading. Everybody says I'm going to start reloading to save money. You don't save a penny when you reload.
No, especially not if your time's worth more than If you make more than $10 an hour at work, you're definitely not saving any money because you got to put your time in too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I do see for the home hobbyist a great way to get something more effective for you. And this whole thing about the 80% lowers and people freaking out about that. I've said for a long time, look, if you go to the hardware store and you buy a shovel, that is a 50% AK receiver.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So this, like the spools of the plastic, right? I don't know. You know what? I know this is like not good production value, but the printer is actually running. Let's just go. We'll take a look here for a second. Let me get us over here. So the you can see there, I think, right? Like, so there's actually, that's working on a little R&D work there on a frame that's being done. So what you see there, the crisscross is the support that allows the frame to be built around it. And then where you see it more solid, that's the actual frame being built, right? But I wanted to come here just because like this, right? Like this is apparently like a 1% firearm, right? Using the nomenclature that was accepted. This is the filament that goes into the machine, and it works off a little SD card that comes out of the computer after I've done the and then this spool goes in here, and then the magic happens up there. So it really is. It's very much like, to me, it feels like photography, or it feels like video work. I remember when I got into photography in high school, and it was like you go into the dark room and you mix the chemicals and you do the exposure and you crop, and you can make your own vignettes with mesh and with cardboard that you just kind of move as the paper, the print paper is getting exposed to the actual light hitting it. You play with it, right? Then we had Photoshop, right? And then we had all the video editing software and DVD creation software. And this to me is like that, right? Like you get into CAD, and it seems right now daunting, and it's a steep learning curve, but at the end of the day, it's just more software that you manipulate. You take your concepts and you apply them to an existing model, or you create the model from scratch. And I've even done some of that. Like everybody knows I carry appendix, and some holsters are better than others in terms of helping you conceal a full-size grip. I tend to carry short-gripped guns because if I'm just wearing a t-shirt, it's very hard for me to conceal a long grip. I use the crossbreed holster appendix carry because it's incredibly comfortable. I've used it for years, done a lot of work with crossbreed over the last decade, and I've actually been playing around with some 3D printed wedges that can be attached to that holster to help me conceal like a Glock 48 length grip instead of a Glock 43. So some product development, which even if it's only for my personal use or some students that use that same holster, that's the kind of thing that you can do now in a way that you couldn't do it. I mean, you could take a block of wood, I guess, and like whittle it, but this is so much more exciting to me because it's so much more usable, useful, and I think repeatable. And that's the thing, is once I get the file right, now I can hit print, and it can print out 50 of them in a week, and now 50 people can benefit from that without me having to whittle each one out of wood, so to speak.
One last thing, we're just about out of time, but one last thing I want to bring up, and often the argument against allowing people to do 3D printing for their own stuff is, well, it's going to be undetectable to these devices, and my answer to that, and I know you've probably got a separate one. My answer to that is I took a Force on Force class at the Firearms Academy of Seattle a couple years ago. And in order to go into this Force on Force class, they had to take a metal detector and go over your body, make sure you weren't carrying a real firearm or anything like that. They found one single round of .40 caliber in my front pocket from a cheap metal detector. If they're going to find one round of .40 caliber, they're certainly going to find a magazine or a barrel or, I don't know, 13 or 14 rounds of ammunition. These guns are not undetectable is what I'm trying to say.
Not anything that I've shown, right? The intention is I'm going to use a real barrel and a real slide and springs and magazines and all that stuff. Now, there are 3D printable guns. The Liberator is the one that made the big news. There are 3D printable guns that are all plastic. Now, this dense plastic still shows up in the TSA scanners. The question is, if the wand, the handheld wand or the magnetometer that you walk through, it's very different than the imaging scanners that high-level security, even like I said, TSA uses now. And these are detectable in those things, right? It's very recognizable. However, there is a law, the one law in the books that sort of affects the production of these. If you were to take and download like the Liberator, an all-plastic gun, there is definitely an opinion that those guns fall under a violation of the Undetectable Gun Act. I think it's actually called that, literally from back in the 80s when people thought Glocks could like get through metal detectors back in the day. And so if I were going to be doing these for any kind of like under avidity arms, for example, obviously we would have serial number plates, just like the polymer 80s do. We would have some metal in here. You could embed metal in the grip. You can embed metal up here. But at the end of the day, this is not a functioning firearm without the Glock style slide, which obviously is made of metal. The barrel's made of metal. So I'm not even intrigued really by, I've held them, I've touched them, I've seen the 3D printed parts at different events. I'm not that interested in a completely 3D printed gun. I'm really interested in the innovation and the freedom that comes with, again, not necessarily saving money, but contouring and creating a gun or R&Ding a gun for eventual mass production. I'll tell you one thing though, the coolest thing in this space, just for an extra minute or two, might be these trigger groups from SIG. The 320, the way the 320 works, this is the serialized part, right? It's got a number on it. SIG has finally, just late last year, started releasing the trigger group, which is the serialized part from the 320. If people ever saw, this is called a fire control unit. There's actually a company called Fire Control Unit. Years ago, I did some video work on their X1, and the X1 took the trigger group from a SIG 320, as well as the slide from the 320, and dropped it into a 3D printed PDW, basically, that with a brace, was still a pistol, and just really was kind of a cool, neat idea. And I've got a couple of these, and the idea is I can now take the file from a 320, which is again is a non-gun object according to the ATF. This fits in there, and imagine all the ways we can manipulate this to customize it into a PDW, into a rifle, into a pistol that fits your hand better. Whatever configuration you want, you can print out the completely non-gun object that the firearm that you bought on your 4473, the trigger group fits into. And I think that's going to open up this huge possibility for people to create their own custom guns. They may be one-offs. It may be the kind of thing where they share the file, and then, again, the file is free information. You put it on the internet, then everybody can print it out, and all of a sudden you're a firearms designer and manufacturer in a way that just simply wasn't possible, 10 years ago. So it's an exciting area. The polymer 80s are the easy way to get in to do it yourself. It's not very expensive to get into this, but there is a steeper learning curve. And I encourage anybody that's really into guns to think about doing it. I've reloaded. I've filed the 1911s. I've gotten into trying to do manufacturing. I've done all the other permutations that I could get my hands on. And I'm excited to be now in the middle of 3D printing.
Very cool. We are totally out of time, Rob. I want to thank you so much for joining us again today, man.
Yeah, always great to be here. Thank you, and thank you for the work that you're doing, and obviously Second Amendment Foundation.
Absolutely. Folks, if I could ask you, please subscribe to the channel. When you do, hit the notification button so you know when we release another video, which we will be doing tomorrow. Thanks again for watching.